I mean, I suppose, Elaine, I want to thank you for sharing your very personal experiences with LED lighting. I think it's an issue that most people are not aware of. I say the majority of people are not aware of. It's something I discussed with my own party spokesperson on climate action. He wasn't aware of this issue. He would have thought, like a lot of us, that LED lighting was the way to go. That was the climate-friendly action to take to replace lights with LED lighting. So can I maybe suggest that we share this information with the Climate Action Committee as well on the effect of LED lighting? And also you mentioned that it has an effect on wildlife and on the ecosystem, and I think that's very important too, that we share information on that. And if you have any, say, you know, reports on that, that perhaps you would send them to us and we could share that with the committee as well. I don't think there's sufficient knowledge on this issue. I'm not sure how many are affected or how prevalent it is. That's obviously irrespective. I mean, you know, it doesn't matter if it's a small number or a large number. It's something that needs to be taken into account when we look at our LED system, our LED lighting. And I'm just wondering, is it something that has been considered by the NDA Universal Design team when, you know, when they're drawing up Universal Design? Are they aware of LED lighting? Do they factor that in to what they're doing? And to Fiona and Jackie again, thank you for sharing your stories as well. And you know, it's heartbreaking to hear that you still have to fight for supports. And it's the same story we hear from every family where there's a disabled person, whether it's the individual or whether it's a family in relation to a child, that they're still fighting for supports. There should be a system where everybody is told what you're entitled to. You don't have to go looking for it, you don't have to go fighting for it. If you're entitled to it, you should know you're entitled to it and be able to access it. And if you're promised something, say for example, you indicated something from Brendan Corish, we're going way back there, promising, you know, supports, and that wasn't ever implemented, and you're still fighting. You know, it's just dreadful. And I suppose if I had one question, it's just, you know, do you feel that medical professionals are more knowledgeable of thalidomide and you know, obviously you work with a number, but would all medical personnel be aware? I know you say it's a small number, so it shouldn't be that difficult to ensure that those that need to know do know. And for example, what you described how difficult it is to give blood, something very basic. I mean, that should be understood.
Just on the medical care, and I know Jackie might have an addition to this, the problem is, first of all, when we talk about Brendan Corish in the 70s, there was an idea at that stage that really we were the survivors of this catastrophic event, and we were not expected to live much past our 20s, our 30s. And there was no plan, because many of our parents were told, a lot of the parents were told that the children wouldn't survive that long and make the most of the life they have, etc. So to our credit, especially, you know, when we reached about our 20s, many survivors went off and led phenomenal, independent lives as disabled people. Almost, I virtually spent my whole life pretending I wasn't disabled. I sort of, you know, we tried very hard to do normal things our normal way. In fairness to us, we got on with that, and it was really only the onset of middle age that brought us back together, as well as, you know, this whole crop of unprecedented reaction to our bodies. Our bodies began to just cave in. And so sometimes I think we used to think with the department, they hadn't heard from us in 35 years. And so we were a bit of a surprise when we came back out of the woodwork, because very little had been needed to be done in the interim years because of the independence of the disabled person in our little group. So they now need to come and realise that besides the thalidomide issue, it's the overuse and the misuse of those disabled limbs, doing things that the body with disabilities were never expected to do, has taken this later toll on our bodies. And when you ask about the medical professionals, the problem is some of us are actually quite healthy. We are in a lot of pain, but we're not ill. And so when we go to see a doctor, it's usually because of acute pain and usually bone-related issues. If we have to apply to the local area care unit or the HSE There are waiting lists for physiotherapy and everything for years. But when we have made that strain, the pain is exacerbated there and then, multiplied hundreds of times. And we need to access services immediately. And the thing is that among our group, I think it's safe to say that a lot of us have, maybe locally, worked with our own physiotherapists that we've been paying our own money to, because they take the time as a private client to understand and assess our needs, and they work with us continually. And you see, if you go to the HSE and say you want some physiotherapy, well, I know in my area there was a 2-year waiting list. So first of all, that's just not going to work for anybody on any level. But also, you're not getting the same consistent person. You're getting a 20-minute slot, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas we have invested time, personal time, and very much personal money in many cases to find the experts in our area who can relieve our pain and can manage our condition. Because, for example, I remember a story of one of the more disabled people in a wheelchair. They dislocated a shoulder and they went presented to A&E. But the surgeon or the orthopedic surgeon on that night wanted to just relocate the shoulder in a normal way. And then they got the bright idea, well, if we x-ray both shoulders, I'll copy whatever is on that other shoulder and I'll match that. But they couldn't understand that both shoulders had unique bone deformities and actually were completely different. So you couldn't correct the bones in that way. And I think many of us have found that. So we need a scheme where we are in charge of our own destiny, because we've invested the best resources of ourselves in finding the solutions. And so the fragmented and very not working HSE system, sadly, is not a fit for us. And the government and the department and members of the office, you really need to understand that, because our solution is actually more cost effective because it's direct. It doesn't need a lot of paperwork. It doesn't need a lot of bureaucracy. We know, as Jackie said, what will fix us and when it will fix us, and that's where we need that support from.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing here, we're all 60 years of age, give or take. There might be a straddle of 3 years in tops. We're not going to be around an awful lot longer. So the exposure for the state in terms of cost isn't much in the big scheme of things. So, you know, where's the justice in terms of affording us some dignity and quality with the rest of our lives? Considering particularly the last 10 years, I would say, as Fionnuala highlighted, around the ever decreasing and rapid decreasing physical capacity amongst many of our survivors, as opposed to, we may not be physically ill, but our physical abilities and physical strength, for example, is rapidly declining. So we do need a lot more support, including, might and sad, by the way, which we haven't mentioned here, and it was very remiss of me to forget to mention, personal assistance supports, PA supports. And I know you're well aware, committee, because I'm involved in another space, and indeed I've been at committee meetings before with you here before. The whole area of a personal assistance scheme that needs to be legislated for, and there's a very good campaign that you're very well aware of, working with the independent living movement of Ireland, and if that is brought in, that would also be very much available to us as thalidomide survivors. So there are things like that that are creative, unique, and are flexible. A system like a personal assistance scheme, and I'm sure indeed even somebody like Elaine, there was reference to her having a support here today to be at this meeting. A personal assistant will be also equally and should be equally available to somebody like Elaine. So there are things that are universal solutions for all of us that really we would love to see the committee pushing for on a legislative basis. So they will be the main points. But the thing is around we must be allowed the choice. The UN Convention clearly identifies choice and control and independence, and particularly for us when it comes to especially things like health setting. And to address your very final question, Pauline, around the medical profession, the problem with the medical profession is they change, they go through GP training scheme and hospital training scheme, so they're ever changing these teams, your doctors, as they go through their training practices after basic medical training. So you might have just educated a group of people in the hospital setting. But sure, you could be back 6 months later and you've a whole other new group of people and they're looking at you with 10 heads. Like, I'm very fortunate. I have a wonderful GP personally, and every year, because he's involved in GP training scheme, he actually contacts me and said, would I come over and I do an education class with some of his trainees on site. So I'm involved in a way with the GP training scheme, and indeed I've been invited to do more work with them in due course. But in any event, so there is awareness there. But again, because the numbers are so unique, small, and we are with doctors right around the country, so it wouldn't be practical or possible for every medical profession to know everything about thalidomide, because it ain't that simple. But once they're prepared to listen to it, and part of their skills training, and any medical profession is about communication skills. Once they have the communication skills, and once they have the capacity and the willingness to stop and listen and hear what we have to say, then we're on the right road.
There's a whole body of research and reports that I can forward to the committee as requested. That would be no problem. But just for example, a very recent study, scientists expected to observe a drop in illuminated areas captured by the satellite. Among those countries observed, 20 of them had an increase of 150% or more of their light at night. Another 60 countries saw an increase of between 110 and 150%. And that's since the introduction of LED street lighting and outdoor LED. So that research is really important because it proves that light pollution continues to grow despite the transition to LED. So it's also a case of what you measure. You know, something can claim to be economical due to one measurement of watts per lumen in the light fitting. But if you look at the total environmental impact as a whole, and the resources used, the difficulties in recycling it, and all of the disposal issues, and anything leaching into landfill like copper and nickel, LED is not what we think it is. We're just measuring literally lumens at watts per lumen. There's a lot of other studies that I have here in front of me as well, so I can send them all on to the committee, because this is really growing now. This impact on wildlife, insects, nature. We all need darkness at night, including our animals, our plants, our trees. If Anna knows the design part of that question, you might know more than I do. Anna, if you'd like to answer that.
Thanks, Elaine. And yes, to add to that, there is an irony that this transition to LED lighting was purported to be on environmental grounds, but it has caused an environmental problem throughout the world, because the perception of it being cheap and energy efficient means we've got much more lighting. Light is time in the natural world. To every creature on earth is light sensitive. It's not just Elaine. Every tree, every flower, every bird. And when we've got too much light, it messes with those systems and with those cues. And ironically, the most energy efficient form of LED lighting that we have in a lot of the street lights is very blue, it's very bright, it's the most environmentally damaging. So there is something that really needs to be addressed here. There was a question contained in the question about how many people are affected as well. And I think one of the previous members answered that to some extent by talking about the sliding scale. There's people such as Elaine that are very severely sensitive to light and are what we describe as light disabled, unable to continue to live a normal life. There's people lower down that scale that are getting headaches, that are having sleeping problems, that are maybe getting anxiety or skin disorders. It's affecting them in different ways, but they're pretty much able to function. And then there's people that don't even know or think they're infected, but those blue lights that are upsetting the natural world are also changing human sleep patterns and circadian rhythms. And your circadian rhythm governs not just waking and sleeping, but every physiological process in your body, from cell renewal to blood sugar. So light needs to be taken much more seriously. I think the Thalidomide Association are talking about how things are seen in very separate departments, and this is one of the problems that's happened with light. Is maybe it's seen as a product like a kettle or a fridge, and we're regulating on those grounds. But it actually should be treated with the respect and the care that we develop medicines, because it affects every cell in your body. So there's a big issue here of actually taking light more seriously. We can't say how many are affected unless we qualify what we mean by affected. But I think there's a significant body of people that are adversely affected, and it is impacting on their quality of life. And it's a big question about their human rights. Could the design question be repeated? Sorry, I wasn't sure which.
When we talk about universal design, be it around houses or the environment, is that taken into account? And I would assume it isn't, by what you're saying, that it's not.
No, I think it's something that needs to be taken into the design stage, and the whole drive for energy efficient products was about working with the designers to make sure that things are designed. But it comes back to the same issue, that they were looking at one measurement, which is what's per lumen, which is, even that is contested. And when you look just at energy efficiency, you're not looking at the environmental impact, you're not looking at the materials, the recycling, the disposal issues, or the wider impacts on ecosystems. So it was a well-intended process that has to some extent gone wrong.